Bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue au Bracket Show. Bruno Barrette en direct de Kung Fu à la dernière journée et j'ai avec moi Chris Sainty. Chris, hi.
Hi, how are you
How
doing?
are you? Pretty good. Yourself?
Yeah, good, good, good. I'm looking forward to a glass of wine at the end of the week.
Oh, definitely. Um, so before we start with the questions, maybe telling us a bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, cool. So, my name is Chris Sainty. I'm currently working as a principal software engineer at a startup in London called Deployed, which I'm really proud of because it's a female-founded and female-led tech startup, which is an incredible rarity in our industry. I work
True.
with some very intelligent women who very much keep me on my toes. So that's a real pleasure to work for them. Outside of work, I'm a Microsoft MVP. I do a lot of community stuff. So I've been blogging for a few years at chrissainty.com. But sort of the past sort of 6-7 months or so, that's been a little bit stale because I've been working on a new book for Manning, which is called Blazor in Action. So I've just finished chapter 5 of that. I'm about halfway through chapter 6. There's 13 in total. So I'm getting there slowly. And then I also do some open source work. So I have a load of Blazor packages that I maintain under an organization on GitHub called Blazored. And that's got various components in it or just helper libraries for building Blazor apps a bit easier for you and stuff. And on a note for that, last week or the week before, we went past 1 million downloads on NuGet, which is an incredible milestone that I never in a million years thought I would be hitting. So yes, that was really, really cool.
All right. First questions before diving into some of the things you spoke there. You just got out of your conference. How did it go?
Yeah, it went well. It was a new talk for me. I'd not done the talk before. It was talking about a pretty advanced topic with Blazor, which was about optimizing Blazor WebAssembly applications. So pretty niche subject and things like that. Not the biggest viewing I've had in live viewing I've had, but hopefully the people who were there got something out of it. And I believe it's also recorded, so hopefully people will be able to view it later and things like that. So, but yeah, it seemed to go as well as it could have done.
All right. Well, speaking of optimizing performance, with Blazor being rather recent, because it's the WebAssembly version is not even 1 year old, I think. How do you think it compares in terms of performance comparing to other big JavaScript frameworks out there like Angular, React, and all the ones that have been there for quite some time?
Yeah. So I think the performance is going to depend very much on the particular scenario that's happening. So Blazor does perform pretty well given the scenarios is optimized for. So if you're building sort of and I hate always starting off comparing it like this, but saying like line of business style applications, things like that, Blazor is going to work pretty well for you in those scenarios. Where Blazor is going to possibly hit some performance issues is around any kind of CPU intensive work. And that's, again, this is very specific to Blazor WebAssembly because your code in Blazor WebAssembly is run on an interpreter rather than using JIT or AOT. So CPU throughput is just not going to be fantastic. And that's where when you compare it to sort of other frameworks like React or Vue or things like that, you might find CPU intensive stuff is more performant in those frameworks at the moment. What the ace up the sleeve, as it were, for Blazor is AOT. So as we speak right now, the ASP.NET team are working on the release for .NET 6, which comes out in November of this year. So .NET 6 will be the second release of this new release schedule they do, and it will be a long-term service. But specifically for Blazor, on the roadmap is AOT, so ahead of time compiling. So AOT will mean that you will, as a developer, you'll be able to select, and I believe this is how it's going to work based on stuff I've read. You'll be able to pick areas of your application to compile directly to WebAssembly code.
Okay.
What this means is when your application is actually running, instead of having to run on that interpreter, it's going to be running native WebAssembly. And native WebAssembly is incredibly fast. In fact, one of the big promises and the big draws, I think, for a lot of people with WebAssembly is not only that it opens up other languages, to do front end development in, but it also promises near native speeds as well. And so that's where Blazor is going to really be able to take advantage of those. Now, like everything, there's a trade-off there. AOT code is actually bigger, so there'll be a size penalty for doing that. Hence why I said you'll probably be able to pick the areas of your app that need AOT compiling. So if you have an area that's doing heavy calculations, something like that, you'd AOT that, but you'd let the rest of the app run on interpreted mode. So that way you kind of get the best mix of performance and kind of payload size from the framework. So yeah.
And you would probably lazy load that area anyways, so that you don't download it right from the start of the application.
You definitely could do that, yes. Yeah, so you could use lazy loading. Be interesting to see, actually, because I've not seen anything about this, is how lazy loading will work with natively compiled. I guess there'll be like WASM modules or something like that.
Yeah, it has to be some kind of file that you're downloading anyways.
Yeah, definitely. So obviously the current lazy loading works by DLLs. So it won't be a DLL. It'll be something else. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. But yeah, I would have thought something like that was a great way of taking advantage of kind of deferring any loading you have to.
All right. But until then, since we might have some performance issues for things like this, shouldn't we be moving more things back to the server? Or are there some things that you will have to do in the browser that will be CPU intensive?
Yeah, again, I think it very much depends on your application. Like the company where I'm working now, Deployed, we're building all our front ends, everything's in Blazor. We're using Blazor WebAssembly. We haven't hit any issues at all, and we're trying to build like a really rich UI experience. So we have animations and lots of kind of smooth transition stuff, and we're kind of dynamically reacting to other things happening on other bits of the page, and everything you would do with a JavaScript framework for that real rich UI experience. We're trying to do exactly the same thing with Blazor, and we haven't hit any issues with this type of stuff yet. However, saying that, we are making sure that we're only really doing UI work on that Blazor app. Anything that's proprietary, business logic, stuff like that, all goes back to our API to be worked on. And I think that's probably a good general guidance, really.
Right.
I think for .NET developers, it's always important to remember, because a lot of people coming into Blazor are coming into it. I've noticed a lot of people coming from either a desktop background or say like a server-based framework background, like web forms or Razor Pages or MVC.
Yeah.
And it's quite key to get the message out there really early that your DLLs get downloaded to the client, and you don't want DLLs to be downloaded that have proprietary logic in them, because they could be decompiled and looked at. So that's another good reason to keep things on the server as well. Like I say, I think as a general guidance, anything you think is going to be a heavily performance-based thing, put it on the server. The server's going to be way quicker at chewing through that than the client will be. And it'll just be an API call then.
And it will do the job, yeah. What are for you, or maybe to maybe orient someone that's at a crossroad where they're not sure what kind of front-end framework to pick? Maybe someone starting in their career and that wants to learn one. Why pick Blazor? Yeah,
great question. So to some degree, it does come down to skill. If we're going to talk about someone who's coming fresh into the industry, if you like, I don't know, graduating from college or stuff like that, I think the first thing I'd say is pick what you enjoy working with. There's lots of languages out there. They all have different pluses and minuses. No language is really better than another one. It really comes down to what it's the tool for the job, because obviously some things are better at certain jobs than others. And it's what you enjoy, really. And if you enjoy working with C# and .NET, like I do, then Blazor is a great framework to pick, because Blazor is going to allow you to build nice, rich, interactive web UIs. You've got a very performant framework in .NET that will run, you can then use on the server, and you can use all of those skills from server based on the front end or front end on the back end, depending on which way you came in and which way you're going to go.
Right.
And there's a great ecosystem around .NET, and there's lots of tools out there. It's very mature. It's a very stable ecosystem. You've got Visual Studio, you've got JetBrains Rider, you've got VS Code. So there's lots of options for doing stuff. All cross-platform, Mac, Windows, Linux. There's lots and lots of options for doing all these things. So yeah, I think that's probably kind of meandered a bit there, but yeah. Let's start off with what you enjoy, and then, like I say, if it's .NET and C#, then Blazor is definitely a choice, because it just means you don't have to go and learn other stuff, really.
Yeah, and you don't have to go repeating code between front end and back end, like models and stuff like this. I think that's one of the biggest benefits I've seen, not having to duplicate code every time. That's a huge difference.
Oh, it's a massive save. I'm a big fan of using like CQRS. And Mediator from Jimmy Bogard. And what's lovely is we can create we create our requests in a shared library, in a .NET shared class library, and then we just have a handler on the Blazor end and a handler on the server end, and it just all just works. So the handler on the Blazor end takes the request and posts it to a certain, obviously, address on the API, and then on the API we just have a sorry, we don't have a handler on the API. We have an endpoint on the API. This is based on, you might not have seen it. It's Steve Smith, Dallas. He's got this package called API Endpoints. It's really cool. It's basically, think of a controller, but with only one action on it. It's that.
Oh, okay.
So we just have a handler. We have an endpoint that handles that particular mediator query on the API, and it just works. All that stuff is shared in the middle. If we change it on that model, on that request, both ends instantly pick it up. It's just such a lovely way to work. And after, having to do, I did Angular for a while as well, and like having to keep TypeScript models in sync with C# models, and all of that is a nightmare. Like you always forget at some point, and then things break, and then you're in this weird debugging session where you're like, I don't get it, because if you look at either end, each end is fine.
Yeah,
it's the talking in the middle that's the problem.
Stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. So either there's an extra property or there's one missing. And they just suck time up, and you just don't get any of that with Blazor. You can just share that code, and you're just going to get, if you screw it up, you get a compiler error. You're not even going to get a build, which is very, very useful.
Yeah. If I go back to what you said about the mediator usage, is your endpoint actually just dispatching commands after, or dispatching to whoever knows what to do with what it received?
So it depends. So the reason I like API endpoints is because, like I say, it takes the idea that controllers inherently a bit naff, aren't they? You kind of have a controller and it's got a load of methods on it that aren't really related to each other, and they just kind of they can bloat really quickly and all of this. And then you, of course, obviously have the very point of saying, well, controllers shouldn't contain any logic either. They shouldn't actually do anything. So then you just immediately offhand something else. So what I like about the API endpoints view of the world is you have this single class with a single method. And it's basically the equivalent of a controller with an action. And that request comes in. Now, depending on what we're doing, we might just do everything in that endpoint, because, if it just, say, gets something out of the DB and sends it back to the UI, well, we might as well do it there rather than offhanding to another class that then does it. Because what's the point? Like, we've just got to create another class that talks to the database for no real reason. So we'll do that there. If we're maybe, where we bring mediator in usually is, like you mentioned, is if we want to offhand something maybe to a queue. So, for example, if we're getting some, I don't know, we're saving some data back or something, and then there's like some kind of event metadata we want to save related to that, we might fire off a mediator query in that endpoint that would then put a message on a service bus that then gets picked up by something else, and something that we don't need to happen in real time, basically. So we do it like that, and we sometimes we'll call off to other handlers from that endpoint. Sometimes we just call into domain services or domain object. It really depends what we're doing, and that's mainly because we work in feature slices. So Again, Jimmy Bogard has this thing called vertical slice architectures. So we very much carve up, and this is another thing where Blazor makes this really great, is we start with the UI feature and we carve it all the way through our stack. So when a developer builds a feature, they own the whole thing from UI to database. And what's nice about this is that we very rarely share code, which means that we very rarely create bugs, because if we change a feature, that feature is not usually relying on anything. So we can rip a feature out, completely rebuild it from scratch, and never worry about breaking something else. It's a very efficient way to work. And the cost of that is that every now and then you have what some people would call duplicated code. Now, usually that's not duplicated, because there's a very micro difference between where it happens in one way and another way, which to me is enough to make it not the same. But yeah, so it's a very efficient way to work. And again, by having Blazor on the front end, it makes all of this very, very slick.
I'll definitely have to try it out, because I've used the Fluxor for dispatching commands, actions from the front end side, but I haven't crossed into the back end. So that's definitely something to check out.
Yeah, cool.
So going back to Blazor in general, I think from what I read, I think it was on your blogs, you're one of the early adopters that really went full on Blazor. Did you imagine it would pick up to be as big as this in such a short time? Because it's been maybe 3 years since it started in the early experimental stage.
Yeah, I think the very, very first experimental preview release of Blazor was March 2018, I think. Around that time, I want to say March 23rd to be really specific, but I might be a little bit off there. But I think it was around that kind of time frame.
Yeah.
So yeah, I found Blazor in the February, so just before that first release. I don't even know what I was doing. I just ended up getting on a YouTube video of Steve Sanderson talking at NDC Oslo in 2017. I think that was in the September of 2017.
Okay.
Where he was talking about all these new things on the horizon. And he's talking about 4 different things. And one of them, I think it was the second or third one, was Blazor. So he just spins up this app and he's like, it looks like the MVC app or whatever it was at the time. But it wasn't. It was Blazor. And it was all running in the UI. It was all running in the browser, on WebAssembly and all of this. And he was using the .NET Anywhere runtime. And yeah, it's the most... It's a brilliant example of Steve, because I mean, through this whole process I've been lucky enough to spend some time with Steve, and okay. I'm not saying I'm like close friends with him, but having a few conversations with him. I mean, the guy's incredibly intelligent, but very, very humble, and this talk was such a great example. He just drops this absolute game-changing thing
out
that
of nowhere
put together over a couple of weekends. And as the story goes, apparently David Fowler from Microsoft and Damien Edwards are sitting in the thing watching it, and apparently they just jump out of their seats and just go and grab him as soon as he comes off the stage and be like, "What was that? How do we build it?" So it was just nuts. So I watched this video and I was like, "Oh my god, that's the thing I've been missing." Because for me, in .NET, I love .NET, I love C#, but I really like front end. I'm a very visual person. I do have a real interest in design, UI, UX, which probably is a little bit different to a lot of .NET developers. .NET developers tend to be very back end heavy, very, it's about the performance and about, the kind of inner workings of things. Whereas, yeah, and and that's great. And I don't get me wrong, I do enjoy that side of it, but I really like front end. And I used to do a lot of, let's say, Angular JS and Angular work. And then Blaze with that thing was like, oh my god, that's the bit of .NET that I've never been able to do. I've never been able to use my .NET skills when I'm building UIs, web-based UIs anyway. Yeah. So that kind of hooked me. I was like, oh my god. So I started Googling around. Then I found the repo. So Steve had a repo on his GitHub that was from the talk. That by that point it had already been redirected to one on Microsoft's organization that was building this first test. So when the first version came out, I like was all over it. I think I built it from source even before that or something, or I tried to.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's been working, but yeah, the first preview came out and I started playing with it, and it like we had like I think 3 events you could use, like on click, on change, and something else, and that was it. There was no other events you could hook into. There was no, I don't think like on after render or something like that wasn't there, and it was nuts to think how far it's come in like 2.5 years away.
Life cycle of the components was just not complete.
Exactly. Yeah. And it was so many things you just started to do JavaScript in Rock for because it didn't exist or whatever. So I was like, okay, that's a little bit nuts. But yeah, so I just kind of got into it, started playing with it, and at the time I'd started a blog for like the second time or something, and I was like trying to really find like what I wanted to talk about because I didn't know what I wanted, you know. Like general .NET stuff was okay, but I was like, loads of people are covering that, and I don't know if like, I don't know, people are going to be interested in what I have to say on that subject and all this. So Blazor was just like this thing. I was like, oh my God, that's it. I can start talking about that. So I did, and it's literally been a life-changing experience because before Blazor, I'd have never considered like doing a speaking event because I've been my whole life I've been petrified of public speaking, absolutely petrified. So Blazor was the first thing that gave me enough confidence to give a talk. And then since then, I mean, COVID robbed me of being able to actually say I'm an international speaker because I was meant to talk at Techorama in Belgium in 2020, but obviously that all went wrong because of COVID. But I've obviously been able to give a lot of talks internationally, virtually, since then, Confu being a prime example. Obviously I've had the books sort of come my way because of that. I've talked at Microsoft events, the Focus on Blazor event, for example. So yeah, I even got to present the Blazor workshop with Steve Sanderson. I co-hosted it with him at one of the NDC events.
That's awesome.
Which is just nuts to sort of have someone of that caliber kind of ping you on Twitter and like, oh, can I just ask you something? I was like,
you expect this every day.
Yeah, it's just nuts. I was just like, I'm not going to lie. I did jump around the living room, like, you know.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah. So that was crazy.
In perspective, to be honest, when I had a chance to confirm the interview with you, from my perspective, I was like, yes, I'm doing an interview with Chris. So I understand the feeling because there's people around that you look up to in terms of subject matter experts. So when you get a chance to talk with them, it's like, that's really cool. So yeah, definitely understand that.
Yeah, it is nuts. And like, yeah, I hit some of the conversations, like, it's just next level. Like, you know, some of the things you end up talking about and the opinions and stuff, you're like, oh my God. But yeah. So that's basically I've been in. So like I said, I've been in Blazor for a long time. It's I literally had someone ping me on Twitter, I think, before this saying, I get this quite a lot. I was like, should I use Blazor for production? I'm just looking at it. I'm just sort of starting to get into it. It's reliable. I'm like, I've been building apps for 2.5 years. So like for me, I'm like, yes, it's good. Like, it's fine. Like, get on it, you know. But really, it's the answer is always the same. Well, it depends what you need and depends on your requirements. I can't really answer your requirements, but yeah. So yeah. Anyway, I've been on Blazor for a while.
Okay. Speaking of community, how do you feel the community support is around Blazor? I've seen a lot of packages come for Blazor that there's a repo awesome Blazor that we see every single package out there. How do you feel the support is on that end?
Yeah, I think there's a really strong community building around Blazor. I mean, there's so many people who are like, you know, sort of similar, I think, to my feelings towards it, like really just latched onto it as something that's going to be, you know, quite game changing in the .NET ecosystem, and they want to be a part of it. And you know, they used to having that kind of rich package ecosystem for other parts of .NET, and they're just, you know, they're doing what any good community does. They're jumping in and they're filling the gaps that are missing in Blazor. So if you want to use, bootstrap with Blazor, well, they'll. It's not like there's one library out there now. Like you've got a choice. Like you go out there and you can pick from like probably 4 or 5. And same with material design and ant design and sort of all these other frameworks. You've got Fast as well, the Fast framework, which is being done by Microsoft, and that's web component based, but is also compatible with Blazor because Blazor can run web components same as any other front end framework. Right. And again, you've got that going there. You've got all the big component vendors like Telerik and Syncfusion and all those lot. They're all they've all been in Blazor for a while. I mean, Telerik especially has been on it since day one. They bought into it really hard straight away with full native Blazor components from the get-go and all of that. So that's great. So yeah, I think the community response has been fantastic. And it's still so early. Like the thing is, like compared to JavaScript, obviously .NET is a far more conservative, I'd say, ecosystem, as in for adoption. .NET is is known for being stable. People who use Microsoft products are used to having a very long support life cycle. So things are, they're there, they're not going away. I think this is why things like Silverlight get brought up a lot, because I think a lot of people were stung by that because it was something that got, put out there and then ripped away again. Through no fault of Microsoft's, it was Apple who killed the plugin model.
Yeah.
And the plugin model wasn't a good model anyway. Like it wasn't a good way of doing things. And so people aren't going to just jump on it people I know like from my time spent in the JavaScript community, if new frameworks coming out, people there are far more willing to give it a go, even if it's only been out for a month. With .NET, it's more like it needs a few years. Like it is literally like, well, it came out. Okay, well, I'll check back in 2022 and see if yeah, exactly. And we are, like you said, we're I think it's May will be a year for Blazor WebAssembly, and I think September of 2020 was a year for Blazor Server. So Blazor Server's over a year now.
Yeah, something like this.
So I think in the next 18 months is where you're going to see people. I think the other side of .NET 6 is where you'll see, like, I think maybe a real steep incline in adoption, because people will go, okay, right, it's been around for a year and a half, 2 years now. Now's the time to, get in there. Yeah, you'll have AOT, better performance. The tooling will be a bit better. Hopefully, again, for .NET 6, the developer loop will be improved. So, hopefully we'll have hot reload, which I think we desperately need, because, that is a bit painful at the moment. And with those things in place, I think a lot of people will be sort of open to trying it and giving it a go. And I think what's another really exciting development is, I can't remember the exact name. It's something like signed HTTP content or contracts or something like that. And it's basically like a new, like a replacement for like shared cached assets. So what that might mean is that basically Microsoft could host the Blazor WebAssembly runtime on essentially like a CDN. It's like that kind of thing, which means that wouldn't have to be downloaded with every individual app. It could be, as long as you've been on a Blazor WebAssembly app, you would have the runtime cached. So it'd only be the DLLs, and then we get over that big initial load piece as well, which I think once you start putting all that together, it makes Blazor look even more appealing.
It's even faster. So there's definitely
much quicker boot up times, much smaller downloads. And we haven't even talked about the fact of using Blazor on different devices, with Maui coming out, and we've already got it in .NET 6 Preview 1, the ability to build desktop apps with Blazor using the web-based model and hosting it. I think Blazor is going to be a programming model for Maui as well. So at that point, if you learn Blazor, you can build native UI for the web, native UI for iOS, for Mac OS, for Linux, for Windows. I mean, it's going to be a good framework to know, because you can literally turn your hand to building anything with it, which I think is, I think that's what makes Blazor really exciting long term, as well as just what we're seeing short term.
All right. still on the community side of things, and you mentioned it earlier, your GitHub organization reached 1 million downloads, to which I'm actually proud to have made 2 contributions. So, did you ever imagine that kind of adoption rate for your packages?
No, it's terrifying. Every now and then it dawns on me that people really rely on this stuff to run their apps, and then you're like, oh. So yeah, it is it's just nuts. I mean, like, again, talking about, like I mentioned earlier, about Blazor being a life-changing experience for me. Again, I didn't participate in open source before Blazor because I was terrified that, you know, people would think my code was rubbish, and, you know, I'd get criticized and things like that. And, you know, just like other people, when Blazor previews first started, I started writing those packages to do things to save, well, mainly to start off with, save myself having to write things over and over again. And then people start to use them, and you're like, oh, okay, these are useful for other people. And then you start getting people raise issues, asking for new features or pointing out bugs, and you do it. And before you know it, it snowballs. And, you know, you've gone from having this really simple thing that you did, you know, because it saved you having to write some code over and over again, to a package that 150,000 people have downloaded. And you're like, whoa, I didn't realize that was happening. And I think with it, I find, you know, it's made me have a far bigger appreciation for open source. I was really ignorant of open source beforehand.
Oh, really?
You know, really, I was one of those people who used open source and never contributed. And like, you know, now being a maintainer and seeing what it's like to have to maintain those packages, and, you know, 99% of people are great, but there are 1% of people who are just terrible. Like, they will come on your repo and they will demand you fix something for them because they're using it and it's causing a problem for them in their production app, and blah, blah, blah. And then you're like, right, well, firstly, don't shout at me because I'm doing this for my own, you know, my own free time. I'm giving up time to do something that you're making money out of. You're not on my GitHub sponsors list, so you're not paying anything. You've not sponsored me for anything. You've not contributed a single pull request. All you've done is open a ranting issue at me that you haven't even bothered to provide a repro for, so I can actually just run it and find out where the problem is. You haven't even done that little bit of work for me either. You're expecting me to go and repro it on my own and all of this. No. And then you're moaning that I haven't done it within 10 minutes of you opening the issue. And people like that need to take a long, hard look at themselves, because, you know, that's not what open source is about. Open source is, I'm going to create something that you might find useful, or I'll create something that I find useful. Then I'll share it because other people might find it useful. And together we can improve it. And that's the point. It's that together we can improve it, you know? So yeah, and that's the stuff I never really got before. So doing all this has been a great experience from that. You learn a lot. Yeah. And you learn so much as well from people code reviewing basically your stuff, you know, because people open an issue and go, you've done that, but that doesn't look very optimal. You could do that instead. And you're like, I don't know what that does. Can you explain why that's better? And you know, and they're like, well, because if you do this, you're doing that, whereas you could do this and it would only do that instead, which would be like 50% more efficient. You're like, I did not know that. Thank you very much. Yes. And if you want to raise a PR, I will merge it. And that would be great. And that's what I like about it. It's that kind of ability to constantly learn. And I mean, obviously it's fantastic being able to build stuff that other people are using and find useful and all of that. But yeah, I mean, it's, that learning thing for me is brilliant. I think that's just amazing. And everything else is just a byproduct. The download count and all that, that's just a byproduct of, you know, learning stuff and then producing something people like.
It's just a sign of appreciation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's, you know, it's a bit, I don't know. Well, it's an interesting thing. It's a bit like what they say about, you know, the MVP awards. You know, it's like if you go after it and your only goal is to get it, you probably won't be one for very long because, you know, you won't keep up the work. And, you know, being an MVP, Microsoft MVP is about, you know, being an active community member and being, you know, a community leader. And if you do that, the MVP is a kind of side effect of it. And that's the way I look at the downloads.
It's not an objective.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I never set out to be an MVP. It just happened one day, which I still don't really believe. But
how long have you been MVP?
So 2 years now.
2 years. Okay.
2 years. So yeah. Yeah, it'll be 3 this year. So that'll be quite cool. And maybe even get a trip to Seattle maybe this year.
Yeah, this year it will be virtual because I'm MVP too. If you
yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, it will be virtual this year, but maybe Seattle next year.
Maybe Seattle next year. That'll be nice because my entire, well, obviously same for you, my entire time as MVP, not been able to go to the physical MVP summit, which is such a shame because that's one of the things I was probably most excited about, to be honest.
It looks like it. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but coming back to the Blazor stuff, like I say, it's the downloads are the equivalent of that MVP. They're just a byproduct of doing something that people find useful and they like. So yeah,
cool. Maybe, well, you answered it a bit in the earlier questions, but where do you see Blazor in a few years from now?
Yeah, so I see continuing trend of incremental improvements. You know, I think Blazor's come on leaps and bounds in such a short amount of time. I think so many people who are critical of Blazor, you'll often look at them comparing it to Vue or React or Angular and things like this, and then pointing out where it doesn't match up. And at no point do they look and go, but those frameworks are 7, 8 years old, and Blazor's 2. Well, less than 2, depending on which bit of it, well, depending on where you want to pick as your starting point. So, the fact that it's getting compared to those frameworks is quite an achievement in such a small space of time in the first place. And the fact that it's got so many features so quickly is another thing. But I think where it's going to go is like I say, more features, more improvements, better tooling, and hopefully taking more advantage of these new web features that are coming through, like that signed HTTP exchange, I think it's called, that I was mentioning. And plus as well, hopefully we'll see some improvements in the WebAssembly spec, because, the WebAssembly spec, potentially is going to give us access to the DOM through WebAssembly. And if that happens, then Blazor, gets the same access to the DOM that JavaScript does. I think, believe so anyway. And that's going to be a very interesting point in time. Yeah. But obviously that depends on WASM implementing those things in the spec. But obviously WebAssembly is looking at garbage collection as well, which I guess would then potentially mean Blazor doesn't need quite as much on its side. It can maybe, I don't know. Once we get this low level of programming, I'll be honest, I am way out of my depth. I am not smart enough for this level of programming. So I don't know what's quite possible there, but maybe there's some more optimizations because it can hook into that, stuff like that. So yeah, I think, like I say, I think more features from the .NET team, but hopefully we'll see some new features from the web standard side of it, and see Blazor taking some more advantage of those. On the sort of broader Blazor thing is, I think we'll start seeing, like say, Blazor coming into Maui. We'll see more desktop-based stuff, and people using Blazor for more non-web projects, basically, desktop projects and cross-platform and all that. I mean, I did a little mini blog series on the mobile Blazor bindings that Elon Lipton's been building, and I loved it. I've never been interested in doing like cross-platform apps like Xamarin apps, because I didn't really like MVVM. I'm going to say it. I hate XAML. I do. I know it's not a million miles different from HTML, but I don't know what it is. I just don't vibe with it.
That's all right.
Yeah, and that. Whereas I built a little app through this blog series using mobile Blazor bindings, using Blazor, the Blazor programming model, and I loved it. It was really, really enjoyable. So I think you'll start to see a bit more of that now. That's kind of things coming through and stuff. So yeah. So that's it, really.
All right. Maybe apart from AOT, because I think that's one of the things that Blazor's missing right now. What feature do you see is missing at the moment that we would definitely benefit from having?
Again, in the short term, because I know this is coming in .NET 6, is the developer side, the inner loop as they call it. The lack of hot reload, I think, is possibly the biggest complaint, or not complaint's the wrong word, but the biggest feature request I think that's probably out there at the moment. And I get people who have asking me about adopting it, and their stumbling block is the developer loop. They're just like, no, we can't deal with changing something, then having to build and then refresh the browser. And in the new .NET Watch run stuff where you save it in the IDE and then it refreshes the browser. That is good, but I've found it can be very hit and miss. For example, on my machine at the moment, I don't know why it just doesn't do it. On any Blazor app I write.
Oh, really?
Never ever happens. It just, one day it just stopped. I don't know what caused it, and it's never happened again since. And if I could repro it, I tried for ages to repro it, because if I could find out what it was, I was going to open an issue for the Blazor team. But I don't. There's no point opening an issue if I can't give a working example of where it's broken. So I haven't been able to do that. So that I think is going to be the biggest thing. I think if that comes out in .NET 6, you'll see a lot of very happy people with that. That will make a huge difference, because we're building UI. You just need that instant feedback, and you're constantly tweaking little classes, little CSS changes, and having to go through that whole arduous rebuild it is painful.
Yeah, I agree on this. Maybe a last question about your book, because like you said earlier, you've got a book that's planned. I think it's for June, Blazor in Action. What will it be about? What kind of people should be interested in this book? Beginners, advanced, experts? Maybe tell us a bit about it and why we should pick it up. I know I pre-ordered mine, but maybe there's some people that are wondering, why would I take a Blazor book when there's so many resources online? Yeah,
exactly. I think that's a fair question. And to be completely honest, it really depends what you like or how you like to learn. So if you are someone who likes to have a book that they can put on their desk, they can underline things, highlight things, flip back and forth, then obviously, the book might be of interest to you. If you're a very visual person, you might not want it. You might want to go and, watch videos on YouTube or something. I don't want to, I'm not a salesman, that opening gambit is probably, Manning are probably like, oh my God, you shouldn't say that. But, that is the truth of it. If you're interested in the book, the book is aimed at basically someone who's new to Blazor. So they have .NET experience. They've done some .NET web-based stuff, so ASP.NET stuff, maybe Razor Pages or MVC. They've used a bit of Entity Framework. They understand that a bit. They have a good understanding. I think we define when we started the book, we defined what we call the minimum, the minimum viable or minimum qualified reader, which is what's the minimum standard of the reader has to have to get something out of the book. Right. And we deliberately put it relatively relatively low, because we want it to make the book as accessible to as much people as possible. So yeah, I think we said you need to know sort of year or two of C#, year or two with .NET, some basic JavaScript, HTML, CSS, you're good to go. And then what happens is through the chapters, we basically explore all the features that are relevant to that kind of person in Blazor, and they get more advanced as we flow through the book. Okay. So at the start of the book, we're talking about the component model, like how do you create a component? How do you pass data into a component? How do you handle events? The very foundational stuff. Right. Then we move on to how do you route between different components, between different pages in the app. Then forms and validation. And then we start talking about creating reusable components, and then go into things like sort of working with pre-rendering and server-side stuff, and all of that. So like I say, gradually gets more complex. Talk about performance, how to optimize for performance, and also unit testing with BUnit. from Eagle Handsome. So a friend of mine, he was a friend of mine, an acquaintance I've got to know online through the Blazor community. So I was so I wanted to get that in there about the book because that's a great framework as well. So so that's basically what you do. And along the way, I decided to go with the approach of building one app and then incrementally improving it through the book, because there's kind of two approaches. You either do a tailored example for each chapter, or each example within each chapter even, or you kind of have this common thread running through. And me and my editor talked a lot about it, and we said that while it's actually harder to write this way because it's harder to make everything fit sometimes, it actually does create I think a nicer experience for the reader, because you have a whole working app at the end of it, and you see how all these different facets of the framework interact with each other. And I think that's a great reference to then come back to when you're trying things, or even if you then use that as a springboard to go off to look at other stuff. So I mean, the book is not going to cover every single bit of every single feature, because it would be like that thick, and there's no benefit to that. The goal of the book is to give you a solid understanding of the features in Blazor, and to give you enough knowledge to know where you need to go off and get more knowledge, if you see what I mean. So that's really the premise of it, and kind of hopefully what you'll get from it. So then from there you can then go off and consume all these other resources to get that real granular knowledge of very specific features depending on what your needs are.
All right. So that was the last questions I had. Thanks a lot for your time, Chris. That was a really interesting interview. I had a pleasure of doing it. Yeah, thanks a lot. Hope we'll have the chance to talk some other times about Blazor.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, 100%. I'm always up for chatting. So,
Good to know. Thanks a lot.
Nice one. Cheers.